Alicia O'Reilly was born to parents Barry and Nancy. They, however, separated when she was only young, so Alicia grew up in Avondale, Auckland, New Zealand, with now single mother Nancy and big sister Juliet. She was 2 years older than her. The words "grew up" probably doesn't really portray what actually happened here. Sadly, Alicia would never see her 7th birthday. Viewer discretion is advised for this educational documentary. Welcome back to Case Documentaries. I bring you true crime, disturbing stories and other things that you may later regret knowing. And right now I'm bringing you new videos every single Wednesday and Sunday. If you want to see exclusive videos though that you can't see anywhere else, along with access to our private Discord server to chat with me and the others, if you want to see behind the scenes updates and pictures, and to be thanked in every video, then please do join the Inner Circle over on Patreon. The link is down below. So thank you to everyone already in the Inner Circle. If your name is on screen right now, then you're a legend. Let's get straight into today's dark case. The O'Reilly sisters were picture perfect and well behaved. They were both bright-eyed and blonde hair. They loved each other fiercely and they always had a playmate. Both were happy children and they had a lot of charisma, but Alicia was the more outgoing of the two. She was also an early bird who began each day raring to go. She had a sillier side and a more playful nature. Juliet was a little more serious and tended to be a little shy until you coaxed her out of her shell. As a now single mum, Nancy didn't have a lot of income to spare, and their home on Canal Road was a rental from the council. Sadly, the building itself was an old one and in desperate need of updating. Layers of wallpaper sagged from the walls, and during the cold winter months, there were windy drafts that would rush through the floorboards, forcing the family to live in the cold. Nancy had used patches of carpet to help keep the heat in as best as she could though. To give you a real idea of the home, the toilet was outside, so a midnight visit would be a cold and maybe scary one. On August 16th, 1980, Nancy was busy preparing dinner with Isabel. Isabel was her 18-year-old boarder and someone that helped look after the girls. The two of them were expecting their boyfriends Nigel and Jimmy, and the four of them had planned a day out at Victoria Park Markets. But that would be the next morning, and the children would be going too. They all enjoyed a homemade chow mein together in good company, although it would later come to light that cheeky little Alicia had actually scraped her plate out of the window when no one was looking. Turns out that she, at least, hadn't actually liked the noodles. It was a relaxed, fun-filled Friday evening, and the girls had watched the Dukes of Hazzard before getting ready for bed. That was when Nancy noticed something strange. Something was off with the way that Alicia's nightgown was wrapped around her. Knowing her brazen, sassy little girl all too well, she immediately intervened, smiling to herself, as the poor family cat thudded out from underneath the young girl's gown. Alicia then asked her mum to come and tuck her into bed, which she promised that she would do. However, her attention was recaptured by the movie on the TV, and by the time she made it to the bedroom, both Alicia and Juliet had already succumbed to sleep after a long and eventful evening. Nancy kissed their foreheads and made sure they were both snug beneath their sheets. That night, a storm had been threatening, and the sound of the sheet-like rain on the tin roof must have been soothing to Nancy as she slept until she awoke at around 7:30 the following morning. Although Alicia was typically up before everyone else, on that particular morning, Nancy saw Juliet sat by the heater. She was engrossed playing with her dolls. It had been a long, cold and stormy night, so she didn't think too much of it. It can be hard to sleep with the noises of Mother Nature raging against your windows. Nancy made herself a cup of tea, pleased that for once she could return to her warm bed. This was a perfect time to read the paper for a bit, before her whirlwind of a daughter would want everyone to play. Once Alicia got up, everyone else would get up too, and that's whether they liked it or not. However, today when the mother passed the kids' room, Alicia was visibly still beneath her Paddington Bear quilt. Nancy was unconcerned. This all just meant a few more moments of peace. Boyfriend Jim got up looking for his tobacco from the evening before, and Nancy casually asked him to check in on Alicia. As he went in, Jim's face dropped. This was something that Nancy noticed from the hallway. Their whole world was about to change, and not for the better. Jim shouted for Nigel to come into the bedroom. He rushed in, and after lifting the girl's arm, he said that they both just instantly knew. Initially, Nancy ran to check her medicine cabinet. Although it was far out of the girl's reach, Alicia did have a bit of a fascination with medicine and playing doctors. So, knowing her daughter well, she checked the cabinet, but nothing was missing or in the wrong place. So it didn't appear that this was the answer. Mother Nancy recounted these moments as being in almost a daze. She remembers being aware of a woman screaming hysterically, unaware that that woman was in fact her. She only realised when she noticed passers-by outside her house staring at her as emergency responders began to arrive on the scene. And no one can blame Nancy for the screaming. Just moments before, she witnessed her mottled, purple-faced daughter, with her features grossly swollen and her Paddington Bear quilt stained with a deep crimson red. Before she knew it, she found herself in the Auckland Central Police Station, and it was there that an officer would deliver the gut-punching gravity of the situation. She was told that her daughter had been severely SA'd, and it was done in the perceived safety of her own bed. Her time on this earth was cut devastatingly short, and all of this while her 8-year-old sister slept soundly beside her. Nancy began rocking and wailing, fraught with despair, until the policeman told her that daughter Juliet was in the room next door. It was at that point the mother shut down completely. It was concluded by police that Alicia's cause of passing was suffocation. She had injuries that showed severe intimate violations, and male productive fluids were found. This is DNA evidence that would have been damning by today's standards, but back then it meant very little. The disturbing carnal element was shocking, and it was something that gave Nancy much to deal with, because she herself had suffered SA in her early years, and now she felt that she had failed her daughter. The crushing weight of losing a child in this way really is unfathomable. Quite quickly into the investigation, both Nigel and Jimmy were ruled out. Alicia hadn't been attacked by anyone within the family home. Instead, it was determined that someone had broken in during the storm. Officers canvassed the area around Canal Road, visiting residents and businesses to gather any details that they could. Police set their sights on a 23-year-old neighbour. This man had a mental age of an 8-year-old boy. This was as a result of a brain injury. The man denied any involvement, but he had described a vivid dream to officers, one where he saw a small boy violate and then end the life of his neighbour. Mother Nancy never believed him to have been involved, but police officers weren't so sure. That is until he was ruled out by DNA years later, DNA which he gave voluntarily. Despite the best efforts from authorities, the investigation seemed to make no progress, and eventually it went completely cold. Now Alicia's murder was added to the list of 66 unsolved homicides in New Zealand, cases that date back as far as 1914. For cold case families, the grief and trauma are prolonged, making letting go, moving on, or even processing the event extremely difficult. Operation Sturbridge, which was the name of Alicia's investigation, did initially have a lot of resources poured into it, but eventually things went from slow to stationary. During all the years that followed, Nancy was always convinced that Juliet had seen something that night. The older sister had always been a little shy compared to Alicia, but she closed off completely after her sister's death. She became completely withdrawn. People had often questioned during the investigation why the intruder would have spared Juliet of the same fate as her sister. Nancy believes that the short hairstyle her daughter had at the time, coupled with a set of boys' hand-me-down pajamas, had probably saved the 8-year-old's life that night. Those details alone are so incredibly dark. Like Nancy, the police also believe Juliet might have some vital information. They even considered hypnotherapy to delve deeper into her subconscious. The possibility of Juliet finally speaking of the night in question, however, was sadly taken off the table completely in the late 1980s, and somehow the case becomes even more unthinkably devastating for Mother Nancy. Nancy and Juliet were sadly in a car accident, ending Juliet's time on this earth. Any answers the sister may have had, along with any glimpse of hope that Nancy may have had, was wiped out of existence. Early on, the mother did have hopes that the killer would be caught, desperate to find out why he had chosen her house, and why he had chosen her daughter that night. But weeks turned into months, and then years. She was later interviewed at the age of 67. By this time, she was battling cancer, almost 40 years to the day that she lost her first daughter, and here she admitted that she had given up hope of justice long ago. But there was someone else who hadn't given up. Alicia's case and the crime scene had been tough to stomach, even for many senior officers involved. Some things you just can't unsee. Stuart Alsop Smith had been just a young trainee detective at the time, and he remembers securing the scene. Alicia's death wasn't the first homicide that he had been privy to, but these circumstances stuck in his mind, and they stayed there far more than any bar brawl gone wrong or road accident. In the early 2000s, advances in DNA and forensics were helping to crack cold cases worldwide, and Alsop Smith remembered how thorough they had been with their sweep that day. They retrieved fingerprints, a partial palm print, hair follicles, and male productive fluids. The hair strands collected at the scene were contaminated with antimony, cobalt, chromium, barium, and iron, leading police to believe he likely worked in the ceramic or paint industry, and possibly even worked in industrial factories along Rosebank Road in nearby New Lynn. They also figured out that his blood type likely made him of Pacific Island or Maori descent. But as strong as this sounds, none of this information had been available to help them find the right leads all those years ago. In fact, he vividly remembers how they systematically ruled out over 600 potential suspects, and how they had cross-checked the prints taken from the scene with a staggering 200,000 sets in their databases with no matches. Alsop Smith reopened Operation Sturbridge and reached out to Nancy O'Reilly, and the mother was taken on an emotional roller coaster once again. However, any new hope that she first had was quickly written off. For some reason, the swabs containing the killer's fluids had been destroyed. This was sadly done before the marvels of DNA testing became available to them. This is something that the mother and the detective remain angry and perplexed about to this day. In 2020, the case was re-examined, and that feeling of hope was then once again rekindled after some unmarked samples were stumbled upon in an evidence archive. However, once again, this was short-lived as analysis only managed to retrieve a partial DNA profile extraction, and whoever the DNA belonged to, it didn't even partially match anyone whose DNA had been obtained previously, or in the entire 4 decades since Alicia's death. It seems that this man either never did it again, or he was simply never caught. Stories of modern DNA testing finally catching up with evasive monsters have made many a headline, none more notable than the capture of the Californian Golden State Killer, Joseph James DeAngelo. Had it not been for those advancements and the preservation of crucial evidence, he may never have been caught and brought to justice. But justice doesn't currently appear to be on the cards for Alicia O'Reilly or her family. Whoever threw out those swabs within that 40-year window may be responsible for a killer being on the loose, and without a full DNA sample, we may never know the identity of the man who entered the home on that stormy night. Questions will continue to bombard the mother. Why Alicia? Why her house? Was there anything she could have done? Will this ever be solved? She'll be left wondering whether the man had been watching them, sizing up the family in the days leading up to the event. A blanket collection of DNA samples can be seen as an intrusive way to investigate. Should DNA samples be compulsory from everyone? Should they perhaps be taken at birth? Perhaps if they were, disturbing cases such as Alicia O'Reilly's, along with those before and after hers, could all be put to rest. For a DNA database to be truly effective, collection of DNA profiles would need to be mandatory. How would you feel about that? Let me know down in the comments. Be careful out there, and I'll see you soon.